Number
Well,
19.
okay.
Oh,
Lovely
well,
to see
hello.
you.
Great to see you too.
Thank you very much. Oh my god.
Back
After
back to
a wee little
school.
break, we
Yeah.
are back to school with a vengeance. I have to say, I'm not sure a break was a good idea for me because, you know, part of my brain was like, yeah, I'm not ready to start back with my proper Etudes yet, but here we are.
It's funny, right? Because I was thinking, I mean, because we decided we were going to do this one a while ago. And it's
Yeah.
such a funny thing because it does not feel easier when you have more time. You sort of get into this rhythm of doing them all the time. And
Yeah, this is it.
yeah.
And like, the one thing about it is, now that we've been doing it for a long time, I definitely have lost a little bit of that, like, oh god, will I be able to get one ready in a week's time? Like, part of it is just like, it just has to be what it is, and that's fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
So at least that's good to know that eventually the panic recedes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then you get used to just learning things faster and getting smarter with each time you do it. So I like that. That's good.
Yeah, me too.
Yes.
Yeah, but tell me, how did you get on with this one?
So, you know I love my bow circles, right?
Yeah.
And obviously you were the person who has had an orchestral job for many a year, so you know all about Lohengrin, right?
Oh, yeah.
I think really what the problem is for most people is actually just string crossings.
Mm.
You know, the clarity problems, and it's often when you have clockwise versus anti-clockwise circle within a short space of time. So you might be going ahead very easily, but then suddenly there's a back and a forward one. So if you know where they're going to be, then clarity isn't compromised. But if you don't know, if you're just chancing your arm and you haven't figured it out, then that's when I think things get unclear. So
Yeah.
I wasn't afraid of this study,
Right.
but just because I love bow circles and I totally love to nerd out on that kind of thing. But I did notice that at the beginning I was trying to make a really clear sound, which is a little bit of clarity on the pads of the fingers in the bow. So I could actually control exactly what movements I wanted to have at all points in the time. So that gave me clarity. But then I did a very quick record of myself this morning and I sounded harsh, actually.
Yeah, I know. I'm finding the same thing, I think. I did not record myself, but that sense of, we're so concerned with, like, it's very easy when you play something with this much articulation that you start hearing the sound under your ear and wanting that clarity that you hear under your ear to come out. So it's sort of a less is more study in a way because there's so much spiccato in its song. And, you know, I just hearing you talk about bow circles again, you know, I'm like, I really wish I did more bow circle analysis in this one. But along with that too, I think it's a real study of like how relaxed you can stay the whole time, because I think it's for myself, I found by the second page, my right hand, my fingers were really tired because I think, you know, as you're just talking about the pads of your fingers, it's this connection to the bow, you know. Apart from knowing exactly how you're doing all the string crossings, it's this connection, and then, you know, there's lots of little muscles in here that control all of that. The other thing I was going to ask you is, did you find that, like, in some places, probably you did it because you're, like, bow circle expert, but did you find that... Did you find that, like, especially in some of the sections with a lot of string crossings, that you needed to have a little bit more horizontal motion in the arm than what you might do for spiccato, or not really?
Yeah, so it kind of, there's so many things that go into this. Like, I definitely agree in these, like, so when you're actually doing a circle across two strings as opposed to one, it's a bigger circle, right? Mm-hmm. So you've got your anti-clockwise still going, then it's semi-clockwise. So you've got like one full beat where you're going in one direction and one full beat where you're going in the opposite direction. Mm-hmm. So I just found it's interesting to see how much are you using just the fingers, and how much then sometimes you need a little extra bit of elbow to kind of launch you. but you can't get too flamboyant anywhere, or else you have all this carnage. So
Yeah.
it really has to be the least amount of movement that you can possibly have, while it being circular, beautiful, calm, light.
Yes. I suppose
Yeah,
that's the thing
it's
is
a lot.
when you're focusing on efficiency, I mean, for myself, sometimes I would just get confused because the motion is so small, you can't
Yeah.
keep track of if you're on a tempo or an tempo in the moment.
Yeah.
So for me, in certain places, I think like a tiny bit more horizontal motion was helpful.
Yeah.
But it's more the sense of that than actually doing it, because if you actually do it, as you say, it takes away from the efficiency of the study, of
Yeah.
being able to do the stroke. And you know, like also, of course, like we'll discuss this at length, I'm sure, the tempo. The tempo that like the Barenreiter edition suggests is pretty fast, 116,
Yeah.
which is I think is what it is in the opera. You know, it's at the beginning of Act 3 of Lohengrin, I think.
So that's 110. That's what I thought was an appropriate speed.
Yeah.
116. It's pretty much the same, you know. But I don't necessarily think. I mean, you could practice this at all kinds of different speeds, and it would be helpful for your technique because you come across this stroke so many times,
Yeah.
all over the repertoire at varying speeds, and actually sometimes it's harder slower.
I think it's harder slower.
You know, slower is just. It's just mental, isn't it?
It's more work for the hand and the fingers when it's slow, because the articulation has to just be so precise. Where I think at a faster tempo, it becomes more about you've started this thing in motion that has to be controlled but also free, isn't it?
Yeah.
So and the triplet thing. I mean, it's so much easier to do these sort of strokes, I find, in like 4/4 time or some sort of double meter,
Yeah, of course.
or like not triplet.
The triplet thing is hysterical because, people always say, I just can't play triplets, whereas actually what they mean is like, we've spent our whole lives going, giving ourselves distinct beats, whereas if we actually just spend a bit of time going, then we would feel just as comfortable, but we don't. I don't know why as cellists I had to go into orchestral rep and suddenly do an awful lot of this. Just stupid accents on the triplets so that I felt that feeling that I wanted to have between down and up globally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're right. I mean, it's a question always of how much of that is nature versus nurture, because I've heard people say, well, we've got 2 feet, we're built binarily. But I remember learning in music history, like the early French, like Aquitaine school, which were like, some of the first people to notate music, all of this like Notre Dame school and stuff. Everything they did was in triplets, because like all the music was religious and was based on the Trinity. So like everything was triplets. They were probably total pros. They'd be like, what are they talking about? This is easy.
I know.
So
this is when humanity does not evolve.
yes. We go through patterns, right? History repeats itself.
Yeah. Well, we'll be here again in another 100 years. So, what I found fascinating about this was the opening.
Yeah.
So, starting off, obviously people kind of, if you put an accent on that first quaver, it sounds terrible. And it's also allegro, so we have to be lively, but it's also piano. So it really has to be quite, you kind of have to already be in your feeling of, and then, so it feels like, ooh, rather than what I was doing originally. It was just like, yeah.
Were you making that face when you were practicing?
I only ever make that face.
I'm so glad you brought this up though, because it is that thing of you have to feel the beat. I mean, we should do this always, but in some music it's even more pertinent. You have to feel this sense of pulse, and this one, to me, it's very much like a babbling brook that's been going on forever, and we're joining the brook.
Revolution.
All that, Jess. Yes.
So for me, it was very helpful to think about this when you think of, say, bar 5 and 6. They're actually going into the middle of that bar, so it actually makes sense to start and do something similar. Light. You know, so you have this constant, even though it's a much longer phrase than that, but you are thinking about it in globally 2 subphrases, 2-bar subphrases.
Yeah.
Because even just getting started on that feeling, you have to be in that mood and mind frame already before you start for the very beginning to be effective.
I agree. And, you know, you've brought this, I'm glad you brought up phrase structure as well, because there are places in this where, you know, it kind of reminds me of Bach, like if you're doing some of the courants and stuff, and you can interpret, right? You can interpret the way you think of the beat as, okay, is it 1? Is it like 1 beat for the whole bar? Or is it 2? Or is it 3? And there's definitely places, like I agree at the beginning, 2-bar phrases. But then when we get to sort of the more string crossy stuff,
or 20, like around there. Exactly.
Then it's more, the harmonic structure is moving more quickly too there. So you want to bring that out. But it also is sort of a transitory passage if you're playing a sonata and you had this you know, motive that's taking you to the next theme. So you want to balance that sense of feeling those harmonic changes and highlighting them with this idea of a long line.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you brought up the Bach comparison, because I love being able to actually think about, away from repertoire that you're going to do.
Yeah.
And then thinking about your. So that's got 3 different layers. So you've got your. But then you've got your. I just played the wrong notes entirely, but you know what I mean?
Yes.
And then you have your. So you have 3 different lines that you as one solo instrument is creating. So when you're there. You know, you can actually play around a lot with what's happening there, and that does make you, when you come back to play the Bach suites, where you have all of those separations of lines going on, that you have to be able to I suppose, decide musically what you're doing. This is a perfect place to practice different variations of that.
Yeah.
And
totally
what you can do. Yeah.
It totally is. Yes, while multitasking lots of other technical things.
Yeah.
Listen now. Okay, so I think this one is fairly, you know, you can't really interpret this, but you know, he's put the dots on these random bars. You know, like bar 1 and then bar 5, only on parts of the bar. But I mean, do we think that? Would you agree that this is sort of the same articulation, a general articulation for the whole movement, or for the whole study, or do you find that, you know, like bar 2? I don't think, for me, I would play that on the string. I would interpret it as still short.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand in a place like bar 5.
Yeah.
You know, you want to bring that out. Is that what we're saying? But I'm still playing the internal notes short as well, even though I might elongate a few of those. I think this is a classic composer thing where you throw it down, and then when you're writing it in your own manuscript, you know that it's implied for the whole thing. And then someone finds your score and they go, oh, look what he did. Yeah, nah. I'm already starting with my nah straight off the bat. Play it the way you want to, but convincingly, right? Now, I do think you have to be very careful with composers' markings, but this doesn't make musical sense to me. I don't think there's any way that it should be. You know, like, why would suddenly that... Like, none of that makes sense.
I mean, you know what though? You play it so well, Ailbhe, that like it almost sounds like it does. So just the proof is in the pudding. If you have the conviction.
But that's the problem is, like, when I do that, I am absolutely mocking it. And that is proof of the pudding that if you give something enough, commitment, that you can't make anything work. Which is why I think that you have to decide for yourself. Like, there was an area, I like playing this on the string, bar 72.
Yeah.
For some reason, that leads itself to me to be on the string. It's the only place that I'm really like, sure, I'll give that a go a little bit longer because I like that linear line. Whereas if we went to bar 11, I love that sound in bar 11 of like,
yes.
It's quite funky. And you couldn't pay me enough to play that on the string.
Yeah.
You know?
And it's also like musically, the playing on the string in 72, it's such a different texture of sound there, it sounds well, it's much more melodic, stepwise motion. We don't have a lot of that. A lot of the study jumps around in thirds and stuff, and it just kind of feels more rhapsodic or free there. I think that's also somewhere where you could take time if you wanted, and mess around with the tempo a little bit for those two bars. And
it's quite cool, like the climax of that whatever. I mean, it's so dramatic towards the end that you're like, yay! Well done, Popper.
So since we're at that corner, I want to ask you a question. I thought of you because I never think of this. Oh my god. 76.
Yeah.
Do you move your thumb over or do you leave it?
Oh yeah. So this thumb question came up a few times for me in this piece because sometimes I did, sometimes I didn't. There I did not, because I don't need it down the bottom. So for me it seems like a superfluous movement.
Okay. Because I tried it and I found the same, but I just wanted to see what your Ailbhe interpretation was. So where did you move it, out of curiosity? Where did you move it over?
I found a lot of those interesting 78 to 79. I didn't need to move it there, and also if we're going from 31 to 32, there you don't need to either. So often in those moments I would just transfer my weight over but not my thumb. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I did actually move it in 32, which is interesting. But
interesting.
On that note. Anyway.
On which note?
When I got to the downbeat of 32, I moved my thumb over.
Over onto the G string?
Yeah.
Interesting.
I just found it helped with the intonation, But that's, I'm so glad you you always bring that up because it's something I don't always think about.
For me, it was easier in 32 not to because I kind of felt like there was a tiny bit less effort involved. So that gave, but then like you say, if you need the support, if you feel like your hand position is better, then it is better to move it. So it's kind of up to yourself. And for how long, I think if I was staying around that area for longer, I probably would have moved it over, but it's only fleeting.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
I was thinking about you in 35 and 36 because you are always very good with your articulation. And this is funny, isn't it? Not? Not. It's interesting. So I was trying to do a little bit longer my bow stroke. In the hope that was accent enough.
Yeah, well that sounded great what you just did. And it's so cheeky of Popper, and this is what I think. It's like, it's one thing to just play the notes on the page, but to actually do that, what you just demonstrated, is so much more work and so much more, nuanced, like, playing with, lots of attention. But I'm glad you brought up the accents anyway, because I wanted to ask you, like, You know, it's always that question with this study and everything we were talking about at the beginning of our session here with the tendency to sound harsh. It's really interesting to think about how to treat the accents because it's not a melodic study, you know, this is very textual. And it's hard to know how to create that accent. So, you know, I experimented with different things, and maybe the answer is to do different things in different places. I like what you just demonstrated here. Like sort of a slightly, I don't know how you would say that, was a slightly longer, weightier, yeah. Whereas I think the accents at the beginning could just be maybe a little bit of left hand
so
vibrato
I was
or something.
A bit of vibrato as well, but there's not a lot of time for vibrato.
That's true.
So, but it definitely helps. So they are things that you could experiment with are bow length, bow weight, and left hand vibrato. They're all quality things, or combinations of 2 or 3 of them together.
Yeah, and a little bit of bow speed, but you're very limited in how much of that you use because the placement. Again, we should talk about that too, just for basics. But the placement of where you do spiccato in the bow is really important, or staccato. I mean, I don't know if you're playing this on the string or off the string. I think I'm playing it basically spiccato, but you're very limited if you go and do a whammy accent in our. Then you know, obviously you're off.
Exactly. Yeah.
What else?
I definitely was interested with crescendo markings because they're a tiny bit vague, right? So
it's like what note does he want us to go to? That's the thing, right? In all of those.
So what did you decide?
I don't think I've made a decision. I think probably usually the note before the high note is a little bit stronger because the top note, so in like bar 12, is already going to speak more. So I don't know, what did you think?
Yeah, so I actually tried them both ways, and like it's hilarious trying it to the top note. It's very funny because man does it jump out. So you've got your like it just doesn't make any sense to me.
Sounds good.
No, but like you'd never do that musically, so I kind of thought, because they actually vary quite a bit in where they're written. Some seem to go to the 4th beat, and some seem to go to the second triplet of the 4th beat. So in general, I thought it was just nicer musically. I'm sorry, that was a terrible job. I think it's nicer to go to the 4th beat myself.
Yeah.
And there doesn't seem to be any clarity between it either in the international edition. So I think everyone was a bit confused. That's why they didn't make proper decisions.
Make it clear. I mean, I think the thing that is clear is that definitely the downbeat is the softest point, you know, of these bars. I think that's from what he's written, or maybe not the softest, but he definitely wants us to like come away from the downbeat in those bars.
Yeah, and following that, a very interesting thing I found was after the downbeat, obviously you've got this two string jump. So somehow, quite often, when you're practicing at the beginning, you'll get that accent on the top note. So you really have to feel these pads in order to be able to control the landing a bit better. Yeah, so and to always make sure that second triplet quaver of the first beat of every bar, and it happens all over the study, just has a bit more care and attention, I think.
Yeah. And completely, I mean, that was something, I didn't practice it so much there, but when we have the really, like the 3-string, well, I guess it's the same, it's just from the C, like bar 68. It's a really good thing to practice, just getting used to how quickly your arm has to find the correct, you know, contact point, string, bow angle, all that. I mean, you can practice it sort of with with a lot of preparation, but I think it's helpful to do that too, so you can get used to. Sometimes it's a psychological thing too, because we just need to realize, hey, you can move that fast, and it doesn't have to be a tremendous effort, you know.
And also the earlier you think about it, the faster you'll move. So you could practice the beginning of 64, 65, 68, 69, like that, just the first 3 notes. So anti-clockwise, clockwise, and they're all the same, so, and then, so they're all the same anti-clockwise, clockwise movement. So it's kind of like a figure of 8, right? And then, so sometimes it's good to practice just the, just to know that you're kind of prepared early, so you don't have to do a movement in the bow and a movement with the left hand. Sometimes that's helpful.
Yeah.
But just thinking about that feeling, so then you know, and practice the prep in beforehand, or so that you're ready to go. So I wasn't ready to go. My brain was definitely ahead of my actual arm. So that kind of idea. So it's all just nice and even.
Yeah. No, it's great.
I like it. What about 63?
Yeah.
Yeah, I felt like that for some reason for my brain, because here I've got an extension, then no extension, extension. It was the adaptation of like extended to not extended. Often when I got there from the previous bars, my brain was like, what?
Yeah, it's the sudden pattern change.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so
that was tricky.
Yeah, so it's just good to think about, okay, just that 2-bar passage. So thinking about, so you know what you're listening to, and then, so you have that, but really the important thing is practicing the bar before so that you can get into the new pattern without freaking out.
Yeah, all about anticipation, isn't it? Like, you know what's coming, you know where you just have to have those little moments in your brain where you're like,
So is this when we've just come back from being on holidays and our brain not being in action is going to really help us, is it?
Yeah, totally. I'm going to be 100% on it, like.
Me too. I mean, I only feel a tiny bit sleepy, so this doesn't go well for this playthrough.
That's all right. We're professionals. We'll make it work.
We'll pull it out because we have to. Right. Tell me about the end. How did you practice those 2 spots? One at 31, 32, and the other one. So, like, for example.
Oh, gosh.
This. Where were we? There's a lot of shifting around there, isn't there? That area.
Yeah.
What was your practice? Because it's quite tricky to work out all those things, right?
Yeah, it is. And I guess, with some of the thumb stuff in Popper and the other studies, we're always kind of shifting with the thumb in mind. I don't know how to say it. This one feels a little different to me because it's more movement sort of in the middle of a thing and also not on the thumb itself. But like, I mean, I'm still thinking of where the thumb is going and my whole steps and half steps and all that business. But I actually found, because a lot of these shifts are smaller shifts, they're third or just one whole step. I did a lot of like stoppy starty practice and rhythms and all of that, just getting used to these stoppy starty, getting used to the small shifts.
I have to do it. But yeah, there were certain points for me that I just needed to be really, really particular. Like, if that thumb was in, so practicing, I didn't practice it enough, obviously. And just stopping there. And then going on one. past that,
Mm-hmm.
then at least you know your hand is firmly in position. But even then, here, just a tone, semitone, semitone back. That was weird for me because it feels like that should have been a bigger shift than just a semitone.
I hear you there, yeah. I felt the same.
It's unusual, yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot.
So much the other ones, yeah.
It's a lot too because a lot of times when you're kind of doing thumb position like this and you get to a spot, then you sort of feel secure, but it's very unsettling that we cross down to the C string almost, or the G string, right?
Yeah.
That almost is such a big shift in weight that it's like doing a shift in terms of your concentration levels.
Yeah.
So it's not like, okay, I've gotten here and now I have 6 beats or 6 notes to play just in this
No,
position
straight
before I have
back
to
up.
move again. Yeah, it's really another added level of difficulty that.
Yeah, and then throw in your string crossings as well, so it's a clockwise. It's funny because for some reason I think we always find anti-clockwise circles easier. I mean, are you Zealander or not? But like basically there seems to be something about this direction that makes way more sense. It's always, anyway for me,
Yes.
the clockwise circle that if I have to do a sudden push back to that, it's always kind of funny. Just fascinating.
Let's not forget also like the bow weight and placement that we need to, if you want the same sound, you have to move like the weight is much different, and you're more weight and closer to the bridge. Plus we have a slow moving crescendo through this whole passage, so
I know.
managing that as well.
Yeah, now technically when it says forte, I stopped the crescendo there. I just stayed loud for that bar because I was like, but then again, because it's going down in pitch, you probably have to still feel like you're crescendoing to keep it at the same pitch. So, hours of fun.
Absolutely, that's what it is. Hours of fun.
Just the second last bar I found fascinating.
Yeah.
Anti-clockwise circle, and then clockwise. So, I think that is an unusually uncomfortable bowing scenario, and by the time you get to the end, it's actually not hard, it's not difficult at all, but I think you need to work it out because by the time you get there, your brain's given up and you're like, I'm at the end, and often that's where there'll be a fumble, funnily enough.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
Very true.
Yeah, love it.
Anything else? You want to have a go?
Let's do it.
many great things.
Oh, well.
You brought out so many dynamics that I'm like,
Did I?
Yeah, you did.
I mean, this one I could have used because I was tired. By the time we got to the end, I was like, ooh. No, that's because we were on holidays as well. Let's not get
I think it was. My thumb was a little sore too, even, and I was like, this isn't even that bad for the thumb. But do you know what? It reminds me of when people practice that Beethoven 8 excerpt. And I've had so many people tell me, like, when you learn that, like, practice it, playing it through the whole thing twice without stopping. You know, because, like, it's just that you get tired with all these kind of strokes. Anyway.
Yeah, it's a lot. And well, go us. I think we did very well. And I'll see you
so too.
In person the next time.
I know, assuming no travel plans go wrong with a special cello together. Yes. So see you in Dublin for our next one. Woo-hoo!
First time since COVID. Oh my god, hilarious.
Crazy. All right.
We love it.
Well, have a great week. See you soon.
You
Bye.
too.